One.
Sounds from the streets of downtown Louisville here on Forward Radio, WFMP LP Louisville, 106.5 FM and forwardradio.org. My name is Justin Mogg. I've been live down in the streets with some of my friends, and we're going to hear from them today here on Truth to Power. You've come to the right place, my friends. It's time for a community conversation about the craziness going on in our world today. And I've got three folks who are going to help us think through all this craziness. Joining me, Justin Mogg, is another Forward Radio programmer. Hart Hagan is in the virtual studio with me. Welcome, Hart.
Hey, Justin. How are you?
Good. Hart is host of Let's Talk and the Climate Report every day on this station at 7 p.m. You can hear from Hart. And then we also have in the studio Jake Bush from DSA Louisville, Democratic Socialists of America. Welcome, Jake.
Hey. So there's been a song I've been bouncing around my brain. It says, there's laughter and oh, there is love just past the edge of our fears. And there's chaos when push comes to shove, but it's music to my ears. And I couldn't get that out of my head when I heard that clip.
That's great.
Do you know who that's from?
Yeah. It's by the band Rise Against. The song is called People Live Here.
Rise Against.
Wow.
Oh, man. DSA, of course, has been out in the streets, and you can find out about them at dsalouisville.org. I just want to acknowledge we invited a wide swath of people to join us around the virtual microphones today for this conversation, including lots of people of color. They're all out in the streets right now, so it's very hard to get them in the studio. So we're a bunch of white guys talking about racism and police violence, which I just want to acknowledge that that's not the way it should be. We want more voices of people of color on this station. We welcome you, and we will get out in the streets with the microphone too. But we're talking today about our experiences over the past 10 days now, has it been, that the streets have been just erupting. That clip you heard was from Freedom Fridays when I was on my first Freedom Friday ride. I guess that was Friday, May 30th, I believe. And we rolled up and there was so much turnout. That was the first day that it got really big, that the Freedom Friday caravan does this sort of figure eight through downtown past the federal building where we're protesting ICE, past the Metro jail, right? And past Jefferson Square. And when we got to Jefferson Square, as we see in more recent days, it's packed with people just erupting over Breonna and now McAtee too. And we were able to catch our tail as a caravan because the caravan was so long that we just formed gridlock downtown. And the same thing happened this past Friday. So Jake, you are no longer wearing glasses because they broke yours. What happened, my friend? And when was that?
Well, the days, as you said, it's been, 10 days? And it was with a question mark because the days are kind of blurring together for all of us, I think. I want to say it was Saturday because I had gone out Friday night to attend a protest and I saw some really horrific things from the police that night. We had to leave early because my wife was looking at me and said, I think the tear gas is about to come out and I don't really want to be in that. And I said, well, I'd rather you not be in that, so let's go home. And apparently we got out right before the tear gas hit the ground. It was a really disciplined, organized scene before that. But Saturday, I went out, I believe around 7 o'clock, and ended up getting arrested somewhere around 7:45 p.m., suspiciously well before the curfew. I was told that wasn't going to happen as long as you're not out before the curfew. Very interesting. But yeah, no, we were shoved forcefully. Like when I say shoved, I mean literally past the courthouse, headed west, and in the scrum of people being shoved to the ground, and the mace cans were out. If it's mace, nobody's been able to confirm for me what exactly I was sprayed with.
Oh my God.
but my friend was shoved to the ground, and when I stopped to pick them up, they maced me. I assume it's mace again. I want to put that asterisk in there. Nobody's told me. From behind. That's the thing I always tell people. I was like, I wasn't doing anything. They got me from behind, man. I was trying to get away. And, so from behind and then thrown on the ground quite forcefully. Vice News actually had a video with a very short clip of me getting jerked by my neck, back and forth, like a car accident. And my glasses hit. Go ahead.
Because you were doing what now?
Protesting.
That's the hard part.
I'm trying to figure out exactly what it was I was doing. That was, they say it was a failure to disperse, I believe, was what the police told me after they locked me up. And I said
traffic.
Yeah, there was no traffic.
Means
disperse means get away. And again, they got me from behind.
You were running away.
And so,
it's top secret what disperse means.
Right. If you don't speak the lingo, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
But, it was very funny, and not in a ha-ha way. I don't know what kind of way, but funny is the word that comes to mind when, the cop yanked me up and I said, and he said to his other officers, this guy was in the mix. And I turned around and looked at him. I said, what mix? My friend was on the ground. I was picking them up. That's all I was doing. And I swear to God, you can only see their eyes because they have the gas mask, the riot shield on the face, the helmet, everything, while I'm out there in a flannel shirt. And he looked at me and said, "Oh, I didn't see it, bro." And I said, "Well, what do you mean you didn't see it? Of course you didn't see it. There was nothing to see." Like, well, of course not. But I am very, very sore still. We're almost a week away from that event. Actually, we are exactly a week away. And, I'll probably have a scar on my knee, and I had to replace my glasses. But, I tweeted that they probably thought they'd intimidate me from coming out again, because that's what it felt like they were trying to do. But, the next night I was crying in my room to Joe Hill, the old labor ballad. And it takes more than guns to kill a man. And I've been out there since, because if anything, we were all in jail sitting around and we said, man, do they think that we're going to be less mad now? Like 20 sweaty guys sitting in a jail cell with barely any food, nowhere to lay down. And we're just like, yeah, we are much more angry. Of course we're going to be back out there. Are they nuts?
Oh, man.
So that's just one of my stories I have from this past week. Definitely the most ridiculous, though.
Well, yeah, you certainly weren't the only one to come away with injuries. They were even firing on candidates for public office.
Yes, they were.
Right? I saw Ryan Fenwick a couple days later
friend,
with a huge bruise on the back of his leg, riding his bicycle to disperse from the police. Riding away from the police, shot with one of those pepper balls, right? And he was just one of many folks who are, certainly like, these are not thugs. These are people engaged in their community, engaged in democracy with a small d, trying to cry out for justice and change and rational behavior. And the response we get from the authorities is more of the same, right? They just, in fact, they ticked it up a notch, right? They bring in the National Guard, for crying out loud. What kind of a insane way to respond to this cry for justice? I mean, it just, you like you said, it just doesn't make any sense.
Well, I have some theories. I'm well known for my theories. And to me, it makes a lot of sense when you look at the moment that we're in right now, because it goes beyond just this latest, every week we see a video of another black guy getting beaten or killed by the police. And every week everyone's outraged. But at this moment, we're in a pandemic. We're talking about climate change. We're talking about an election that everyone is dreading. We're at a moment where people really feel insecure. And I think the police understand that if they want to maintain order, and by order, I mean the present order, which is not good in my opinion, if they want to maintain that, then they're going to have to crack some heads at some point. So I think they're setting the tone right now. That's what it feels like to me, is they are desperate to prove that they can keep people under the boot, because that boot is going to be really important once we see climate change get worse, once we see the pandemic get worse, the effects of the unemployment and the recession and everything else that we're facing right now. The police have got to respond this way, unless, you know, they just want to let the people take over, which to me sounds a lot better, but, you know, not to them.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but, you know, it seems like I keep wanting to say riots, and I don't know why, because I'm totally on the side of the protesters, but these riots wouldn't be happening if it were just about police violence. Unfortunately, there's the pandemic there, and there is hopelessness. There is a lack of economic opportunity, which has always been there, and it just seems like a convergence of things.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, I think everybody's cooped up at home. Nobody's working. You know, everybody's just already, there's just like a vague sense of everyone being a little bit mad nowadays. And I'm the young guy on the show, so maybe it's always been that way, but it feels like everybody has just been vaguely mad for months.
When it comes to politics, you're my senior by about a decade. I'm a baby.
That's an honor.
I'm a baby when it comes to, you know, the terminology always lacks a socialist, leftist. I like to say I'm for the frickin' people versus concentrated capital. It's concentrated capital versus people. And I'm on the side of the people. And the reason I wasn't 2 years ago and prior to that is because I couldn't see anything. I like saying that when my politics changed, my values didn't change. My understanding of the facts changed. And I'm as mad at I'm madder at the media and my teachers. Well, not just the teachers, but, you know, we get our information from education and from the media, and I feel betrayed. You know, I carry that indignation on my sleeve.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the media coverage of what's been going on. I don't pay too much attention to the national media. I get a little bit of it, but for the first time in years and years, I started watching local news because I wanted to see what was happening on the streets. And when things first began,
you must be getting desperate, Justin.
Right, desperate. The night of the looting, especially, the narrative that the media was painting, that the mainstream media was painting, was that it seems like there's a few outsiders, people from out of town. They kept saying people were coming in from out of town. All these Louisville folks were peaceful protesters trying to make legitimate points, and it was these out-of-towners coming in who were looting. Now, when I heard that, I thought they might be right, but it's probably the Proud Boys and like guys with guns coming in from white guys with guns coming in from out of town trying to agitate. But that theory does not seem to have held water. I haven't seen that myself out on the streets. But then as I've watched the local media in more recent days, I feel like they've really become a part of the movement. The perspective I get from the local media is actually walking with the protesters and being there with the protesters and observing what's going on and talking more to the protesters than they do to the powers in charge. Now, that's not universally true, but that's just more of a general feel I get from the media. What is your all's sense, and what media are you paying attention to?
Well, you know, the folks listening to this are not going to be able to see me. I'm over here cracking my knuckles, literally. I'm like getting pumped, you know, because this is definitely something that's been very infuriating for me as somebody who has been there quite a bit. And you're referring to Friday night with the looting, I believe, and you know, that whole situation was infuriating to watch on the news, because I did watch the news that night, and I don't ever watch cable news like you were saying, Justin. But, you know, I did watch it, and my wife and I were just stunned, you know, because like I said, we had been out there at the protests for a couple, 2-3 hours.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine it going on. Yeah.
No, because it didn't go on, because everybody was very disciplined. Everybody was listening to the leaders and the organizers. Everybody was on message. Even when people got a little bit rowdy, people checked them. You know, that's something that if you've never been in the streets and demonstrations like this, you know There will always be people who get angry and rowdy. We're out there because we're angry. You know, the point is that there are people there who can de-escalate, who are there to organize and there to keep people disciplined, right? The police are not those people. Because I can remember everything was pretty chill to the point where I even thought to myself, this is a little bit lame. I really did have that thought, like everybody's really quiet, like I don't know what's going on here. And then as soon as I go looking around, you know, you got a couple dozen riot police coming from one direction, couple dozen coming from the other direction, and they're in military ranks with the baton across their chest. And it's just terrifying. And then the tear gas comes out and then things go nuts. And, you know, they blame it on the outside agitators. Let me tell you what that is. That is local media and the mayor's office speaking directly to their development buddies and the tourist board. That's what that is. They're trying to say once all this blows over, all that development money is totally safe. I promise you. No one in Louisville would be angry at the developers. Come on. You know, why would they be angry? Now, this is a legit question to you all. Let's go ahead and get talking on that if you want. Why on earth would anyone in Louisville be angry at 4th Street Live or the big developers all over downtown and in New Lou? Why on earth would anybody be angry at that here in Louisville?
Because government is a puppet and big money is the puppeteer. And big money not only deprives us of the of social services and things that people would spend money on if people were in charge. But also, you know, big money is just irrational in, you know, not providing Medicare for all, not providing, you know, free college. These things are cheaper than the privately funded alternatives. And the fact that we don't get these things, it's like the reason is that's the threat of a bad example. The reason we don't get UBI right now is it would be a bad precedent to set. And once people start thinking, hey, maybe we can have a government that is of, by, and for the people. Maybe we can have policies that are by and for the people instead of by and for concentrated capital.
Yeah, and so like that's my thing about the media is that when so many of their sources come from within the police department and their sources also come from the mayor's office, you know, Hart and I, we've been talking about media analysis for the last 3 months, you know, and the thing that you see over and over again is the over-reliance on the mayor's office, over-reliance on the police departments and the PR people and all this. So when you see the news focus incessantly, like I remember they focused on, I think it was Manhattan Grill downtown, that their windows were busted out during the protests.
Yeah. I saw that interview with the shop owner.
Right. And I thought that was sad. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of like looting or something like that because, you know, whatever. But why is that the focus, right?
Right.
You always have to ask that.
Exactly.
What service is this doing by putting this and making this the focus? And it takes away the fact that all of this, we wouldn't ever have even gotten to that point had the tear gas not come out. That is a perfectly logical, everyone knows what's going to happen when peaceful demands are met with violence.
Yeah, so what's the cause and what's the effect and what's really going on?
And that narrative is completely missed by most mainstream news. Absolutely. So, and if I could answer your question real quick, Justin, and I'll shut up. I know I'm taking up a lot of space, but I'm very mad right now.
You're the man. Yeah, that's why you're here.
Well, it's just that the one local news outlet that I have consistently seen good coverage for the past 2 weeks, not always perfect, but at least attempting to be fair and honest, has been the Courier-Journal. Because they have embedded, from the beginning, they have embedded their journalists within the protests, and they have not attempted to just drive by in their vans with their big red WDRB or WLKY jackets. They're just there in plain clothes within the protests. They actually got a photo of me being arrested while the sun was still out, which was great because my mother was told by the people at the jail that I was arrested at 9 p.m. on the dot. And it's really nice that I could post that picture and everybody's like, I know sun positioning, that's bull. So,
right.
Shout out to them.
Is that what your arrest record says, that you were out after curfew?
No. My booking time was, I think, at 9:12 p.m. because they detained us for over an hour before we were actually booked. Well, that's, who knows? Because the first person arrested was arrested probably at 7 on the dot, right when they started shoving us. He was in my van, and his booking time, I think, was 8:58 p.m. which makes me wonder why did you wait 2 hours to book him? That's fascinating. Why'd you just sit him in the back of a van for 2 hours? Very curious. Very curious.
We're speaking today with Jake Bush, who was arrested on the streets of Louisville a week ago today.
Because he's a common criminal.
A common criminal, yeah. We like to get the criminals on the air here on
We like aiding and abetting crime here at Forward Radio.
No, we want to unmask the real criminals in society, and that's what we're talking about today. What happened with these protests in Louisville, why they're happening, what the real story is, and we're also having a little chat about media coverage of it here on Truth to Power on Forward Radio with me, Justin Mogg, and Hart Hagan. Hart, have you been out in the streets to see any of this at all, or are you hunkering down? I'm scared of COVID just as much as I am scared of these cops.
Same here. I mean, I don't have the courage of a Jake Bush or anything like that.
But have you been watching the media about it? And what are your thoughts?
I wish I had more firsthand information. One thing I have observed, I call it pearl clutching and hand wringing. When you're talking about, all this property damage, and I think of a system in which we're regularly being robbed. And take the drug war, for example. The drug war incarcerates nonviolent drug offenders. Meanwhile, banks are laundering money for the drug kingpins, and chemical companies are providing the chemicals that are needed to process cocaine. And the U.S. military is flying over Colombia, spraying herbicide, supposedly killing off the coca plants, but they kill off all the other plants, and they're driving peasants off of their farmland. And so the people are systematically being robbed of everything that counts, and that's not hyperbole, but that's the violence inherent in the system. And anybody, that's
sounds like Monty Python.
So, I mean, Monty Python is the reason I'm here. That's where I got my political education. Yeah.
Help, I'm being repressed.
So you saw it, didn't you? He's repressing me. You saw it, didn't you? So Jake is like, he's repressing me. You saw it, didn't you?
You don't vote for kings, Art. You don't vote for kings.
That's so good.
But let's bring it back to the streets. I want to get some more firsthand perspectives from Jake, because he's definitely done more of the trench warfare than either of us, right? What have you seen in terms of the mood of the protesters evolving over time? The police tactics certainly evolved over time. And what about counter protesters? I know that's three different things, but just share some more firsthand thoughts.
So the mood from the protesters, I would say that everybody is obviously angry. Like, that's the obvious thing. And that's, I've been involved in like street protests and stuff probably since Ferguson, I think. So like maybe 6-7 years, right? And it's always anger, but it's normally a very aimless sort of anger. Like, everybody's sort of mad. We can't agree on who we're mad at. We can't agree on what to do about it. There's sort of an indecision kind of feeling, like, is this okay? Are we doing the right thing? Should we do more? Should we do less?
Yeah.
But
but
it feels like this time feels different. This time, when I went out yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I think, all the days are running together. No, it was yesterday. There was a protest put together by U of L students, Black Student Union.
So this is Friday. We're talking about June 5th. Yeah.
That's correct. Thank you. Yeah.
I was there too, and it was, I just want to quickly interject. It was Brianna's birthday. And
yes.
Of course that was mournful. There was rage, but I also felt a bit of, people want to celebrate, some of our victories. The fact that people are standing up is a reason to have some joy, even in the midst of all this sadness. So I saw a little of that on the streets on Friday. Go ahead, continue.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to point that out, that there is such a strong sense of camaraderie that have been feeling, and maybe that's just me, but I think it's a real thing. You know, yesterday I ran into one of the guys that I was in jail with. You know, a 22-year-old black guy, you know, who was detained for 28 hours.
Oh my God, really?
I was detained for literally half of that. And that was already horrible. But, you know, we saw each other from across the park. We ran over and hugged each other and you know, introducing our significant others and everything. And you see a lot of that at these things, a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life. And it feels very pointed now, is how I would put it. You know, when I came out and protested after Ferguson up here in Louisville, my first ever protest, I didn't even live in Louisville at the time. I was one of those outside agitators. But you know, we did take the intersection in front of the Yum Center that time, but everybody felt very hesitant, you know, whereas this time yesterday, we just walked right into the street and we just marched all over town because, you know, there was a very, you know, the old chant of whose streets are streets, you know, everybody says that every time. This time we meant it. Really meant it.
Well,
right.
I saw an interesting thing happen too. Oh, and I also need to point out the tactic that protesters used on Friday the 5th to come out with young black men and women wearing their graduation caps and gowns. I thought that was just such a powerful image, you know, of we are people and we are valued. We should be valued, right? And the folks who were leading the march were wearing those caps and gowns. They got to an intersection, and straight ahead and to the left was perfectly clear, and to the right was the National Guard with one of their Humvees blocking the road. And what did the protesters immediately, without question, decide to do? We're going to go to the right and we're going to confront them. And it wasn't in a we're going to throw rocks kind of way. Right?
Molotov cocktails.
Right. It wasn't that. It was more of a sense of these are our streets and they are going to recognize that fact. And indeed they did. They instantly cleared the street, moved the Humvee out of the way. So the police tactics have really evolved. Like at first it was clearly like, we're going to take control of these streets and show these protesters who's boss, but that seems to have melted away. And I'm wondering if they just realized they can't control the streets, or if it was more, I don't know, the mayor figured it out, or what do you think?
That's a great question. And I don't think that's something we'll ever know, really, because it could very well have been that they had some closed door meetings and had some discussions. But I can tell you that when I was in jail on Saturday, so a week ago today, they were already exhausted. You know, the COs, you know, the corrections officers, they were talking to us in the jail like, man, we're tired. We've been working 16 hours, you know, and I gave them the world's smallest violin for that. You know, you're telling me I'm locked up like an animal in here. I don't care, you know. But at the same time, you know, they were already tired, you know, and there has been a lot made about how they're pulling in people who normally work desk jobs and now throwing them in riot gear, or there's people who, you know, are not normally on the front lines of anything, and now they are. It's a lot of unmarked officers, you know, like you see it all over the country on social media, especially on Twitter. They're posting pictures of guys without any markings whatsoever. You have no idea who they work for or where they're from. And that's terrifying for obvious reasons. But it also is a sign, I think, that they are running out of options. They are running out of manpower and they are running out of options. And I think it's a very possible thing that they are just exhausted, and that changes their tactics.
Because the people have not backed down in the least. In fact, it feels like numbers have been growing. I mean, what was it, Thursday when it was raining, the numbers were lower. But other than that, the massive...
Nothing else to do. Everybody's unemployed.
Well,
that's right. Yeah, the masses are really...
Sitting at home on COVID.
Yeah. Well, and I'm really worried about what this is going to mean in terms of the spread of the virus too, because there's definitely no social distancing out there. I mean, you do see some masks, but man, of course, like people.
They're all 20-somethings. They can handle
it.
Well, hey, I said this before. It's very, very hard for me to protect myself when you knock the mask off of my face physically. Thank you. And then you don't give me another one until I've already sat in a van for an hour breathing on other people. So it's not my fault. I tried.
Well, and the police aren't setting a good example either. I mean, even they're sort of encamped in my neighborhood at Paris Town Hall parking lot, and those guys are just hanging out like it's any old day. They're not wearing masks. They're not social distancing. So, yeah, I don't know what the authorities are thinking in terms of, we can only focus on one thing. We can't deal with the pandemic and the people.
Well, they got the money for riot gear. I'd imagine that's soaking up all of their mask budget. I don't know. It is interesting, isn't it? How expensive was that riot gear, and how many masks could you have bought with that?
Yeah. Or other things, healthcare and education and everything else we could be spending. So certainly a new. Oh, there's so many demands from the protesters, right? But I've seen a lot more attention paid to this whole idea of just defund the police. At first it was prosecute the police, and certainly we need to think about that for those individuals. But really one of the structural issues here is far too much money going to quote unquote law and order that could be going to address the root causes that are bringing people out in the streets in the first place, that are letting such rage boil over, right?
Yeah, so Colin Powell was told by, I wish I could remember the name of the woman who was, the UN ambassador or something, and she said, she told Colin Powell, what's the use in having this big army if you don't use it? And it's like, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you militarize the police, they're going to go out on the streets looking for a battlefield. If you militarize the police, they're going to go out on the streets seeing the people as an enemy. And you were talking about money, Justin. Police are expected to deal with homelessness. They're not trained for that. They're not equipped for that. They're expected to deal with mental illness. They're not trained for that. They're not equipped for that. They don't have a place to take people humanely if there's mental illness involved. I've seen a policeman shout at the top of his lungs at a mentally ill veteran, homeless veteran. And it's like, what good is this doing? And what is going on in your life that you have to do this? So.
And, my background is that I have a bachelor's in social work and I have a master's in public administration, right? So this is one of those topics that I actually am somewhat credentialed to speak on.
At last.
And the thing about that is that, a lot of the money, the way that they distribute funds, especially from the federal government down to local levels, a lot of that is tied up in use. It is very literally use it or lose it. And a lot of the budgets that the police have for all of this massive weaponry and stuff, a lot of that very much is, if they don't ever use it, they will lose it. And there's an incentive right there to just use it anytime you have an excuse, And I think that that's what a lot of this defunding talk is coming from, is recognizing that, when you look at the city's budget, it is alarming, and not just Louisville, everywhere. It is alarming what percentage of the budget is dedicated to the police rather than anything that is a preventative measure to keep people from getting into the cycle of poverty and despair and sort of disillusionment. You know what I mean?
Well, one reason for that, I feel, and I think that, follow the money. And it always sounds cynical when you say follow the money, but in another breath, we're saying that we need to get money out of politics. Well, why? For-profit prison companies are always, that for one, just to name one, for-profit prison companies are always pressuring federal and state legislatures to keep sentences tough. They want to channel people into prison. They also do, immigrant detention and that kind of thing. So there's always this pressure there's always pressure for draconian laws and enforcement coming from that crowd.
And in some cases you get, like in Minneapolis, there was the outrage over the Target being looted. But it came out shortly afterward that Target had actually directly donated money to city prosecutors to increase the incarceration rate. as sort of like a loss prevention thing. They were actually training
If we put
employees.
enough people in jail shoplifting, we won't have to deal with shoplifting. You just,
But seriously,
yeah.
yeah, you're joking because it's hilarious, but they really thought that, and so that's one of those cases where when people have been trying to make you stop doing that through democratic means for a long time, it doesn't take much to realize that eventually they're just going to get fed up and they're gonna do something more drastic. You know what I mean? So again, not saying good, bad, whatever. I'm just saying it's pretty predictable what's going to happen.
And Jake, I do want to know, getting back to the streets, if you've seen any counter protesters, and if you share my concern too that the white nationalists are going to show up with their guns and try to wreak havoc.
Yeah. Sorry, we kind of got away from that with so many different topics to, you know what I mean? So many different topics. Sorry. But yeah, no, that is a serious concern, especially in smaller towns and counties. Here in Louisville, I think they rightfully feel horribly outnumbered.
Okay.
But it is a thing. As a matter of fact, I just got a text while we are sitting here.
Wow.
That two quote unquote boogers have been spotted downtown, and I'll explain what that means. So the latest permutation of the sort of Ouroboros of nerds sitting in their basement being mad about women in video games or whatever they're mad at today. They get on their message boards and they make jokes about attacking minorities and women and stuff, and it has turned into them planning the Boogaloo, they call it. And the Boogaloo, in their terms, is the Civil War II Electric Boogaloo. They're very clever people. And their express mission is to incite a race war. And a lot of them have actually suggested going to these protests. And there's plenty of videos and pictures, even here in Louisville, of armed to the teeth white men in Hawaiian shirts. They all wear Hawaiian shirts. So if you see a white guy in a Hawaiian shirt, he's not your friend. He'll probably be carrying a sign that's supportive of Black Lives Matter or Breonna Taylor or something along those lines. But they do that intentionally to get behind the protester lines so that they can start the violence. That's what they want to do. So far, they seem to be pretty unsuccessful, but that is a thing.
Well, was it ever discovered, like a week ago, Thursday, something like that? There was, 7 people were shot. And
that was Thursday.
Did we know who pulled the trigger?
No. The police are producing every weapon, quote unquote, they pulled off of people. But the 2 weapons I'm really, really curious about finding over the last couple of weeks would be the weapon that was fired and shot 7 people here in Louisville last Thursday. Still hasn't been recovered. I have no idea how, because I saw the videos and I know people who were there, and they said they were completely surrounded by riot police. So they have no idea how that person got away, much less the weapon. And then I'd also love to see the weapon that was taken from the scene where David McAtee was killed. But of course, they haven't produced that either. So nobody knows. But here's my thing, guys, on this, the infiltration. Unless you have exact proof of what's going on, I would say, hesitate on pointing the finger, right, with the looting and anything else, because that is you doing the police's job for them.
You're asking me to exercise restraint. I'm not sure if I can go there.
Yeah, I should know better. But their purpose is to split people up so that we are not in the streets collectively disciplining one another. And if we're all sitting around in our own homes pointing the finger, trying to figure out, well, was it white anarchists that were breaking the window? Were they white supremacists? Was it an undercover cop? Was it somebody who just peeled off from the protest group? Did they break the window? The longer you're doing that, the longer you're not in the streets actively pushing. You know what I mean? So I would just recommend to everyone, be wary, be vigilant, but don't get paralyzed.
Our guest today here on Truth to Power is Jake Bush from DSA Louisville. You can learn more about the Democratic Socialists of America chapter here in Louisville at dsalouisville.org. They have been out on the streets in coalition with so many to protest the lynching, the modern day lynching of unarmed black folks in America. And this just rolling tragedy that has gone on for decades and decades in our nation and has taken so many forms. And the form today is the form of violent policing, unaccountable police, and it's all tied into mass incarceration, right? So in our last 20 minutes of the show here, I would really like to focus on some of these sort of structural issues and what we all see as a way forward. I mean, yes, getting out on the streets and demanding justice for these individual cases is really vital and in the moment, and we must do it. But we also need to think about tackling the structural issues more broadly. How do we move away from a world where we feel that we have to incarcerate so many people? I mean, how did this come to be, and how do we move forward? What are your...
So I was going to say, Jake, you're the revolutionary. What's next? I mean, you're calling the shots.
Well, it's definitely not me calling the shots. I'll distance myself.
Maybe, but
yeah, I'm going to distance myself from that. But you know, I think that there's a couple of things, but it all comes down to, at this point, just stripping the police department for parts. Honestly, like that is honest to God what it's going to take. I know that sounds very incendiary, and it may sound absurd in some cases. But here in Louisville, we have somebody running for Metro Council, Robert Bell, a DSA member himself, longtime community organizer and activist, just an all-around do-gooder, you know. But he has put forth on his page a plan to defund the police, and he sells it as just evidence-based fiscal policy, and it is. And what he's saying is that we have tried for decades and decades to invest in a public health strategy which has utterly failed. Put it very simple, you know, since the 1990s and the crime, you know, all of the crime bills that were pushed since then to boost the police's budget and their armory.
3 strikes and you are out. I can remember Bill Clinton saying that. Three strikes and you are out.
Like, I don't even know if I was born yet, but yeah. Yes.
Well, Jake, I can tell you, in my 46 years on this earth, it's been really clear that this is not a Democrat-Republican issue. This is arming and militarizing the police in defense of capital issue. I mean, it really comes down to that.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying is that, you know, we've tried this public health strategy, if that's what it is, and I'm not convinced that it is, but if that's what it is, then it's and then it failed. So we got to try something else. And the suggestion that he put forth was, you know, we're not saying we knock it down to 0 in one day, but what we're saying is, where can we allocate resources for preventative measures? You know, Justin, you mentioned healthcare, housing. Hart, you mentioned mental health services. You know, all of these things that the police are supposed to deal with things after the fact, you know.
Clean up the mess, yeah.
They're there to clean up the mess.
Just right.
Right, and they just are not equipped for that. That's not what they're here for. That's not what their job is, put simply. And so the point would be, where can we cut those budgets and start allocating resources elsewhere? That's honestly what it's going to take.
Yeah. At some point, the local government needs to stand up to the state and federal. And we have a federal system. Metro government is not in charge of Congress, but damn it, they need to speak for us instead of playing games. And it's like highway funds are being, you know, transportation budget is being used to widen highways. The last thing we need. And what I hear you all saying is that a lot of the funds that we get from the federal government for policing are designated, and it's use it or lose it, and you have to use it for those things. And we need a Metro Council and a mayor's office that is going to speak for us. I mean, we've got, you know, I calculate every citizen spends about $4,000 a year to support the military. And then they come into our communities with ROTC and take people out of our communities to go kill people instead of all the other things that we need for public health. And, you know, we need a Metro Council and a mayor's office to stand up for us, even if they don't have the authority to call all the shots.
That's a fantastic point, Hart. And I would say,
I know.
I would say that what we really need to call for is not defund the police, but defund the military.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because if you think about America globally, we are just seeing on the streets of Louisville what people around the globe have been suffering at the hands of America for as long as this country's been around, right? We throw so much more money into our military than any other country that it's ridiculous. So that means we are the global police, and we get to impose our violent will on any poor folks anywhere, right? And what happens is it all trickles down to the streets of Louisville, because those surplus Humvees and military gear all end up in our police department. So even if we defunded Louisville Metro Police, they'd still get all this military gear because we've only increased the military budget. So I'm almost convinced that the more important thing is to think more globally about the suffering that we are imposing on mostly people of color all over the world, and not just in America, and defund the military first and foremost, and then think about the police as well. What's your all's reflections on that?
Whatever they're doing to people abroad, they're going to do here. Surveillance abroad, surveillance at home. Militarization abroad, militarization at home.
Yeah, I do believe in international solidarity first and foremost. I think that's a core component of any serious leftist. I'm quoting all kinds of musicians today, guys, but Run the Jewels, a rap group, just put out a new album, and on there they said they didn't build the cage for just one group. And that's exactly right. They built the cage, and it ain't just for one person. If you think it's just for one group and you're never going in that cage, you're wrong. So I agree, I think it's going to have to be, here locally, we can only do so much about military spending. But you can do a lot about defunding the police locally, and you can use that momentum to push farther. And I think that's incumbent on organizers to keep the momentum going. And also cleaning up the court system. I'm reading here from the Washington Post about how a judge apparently signed off on that no-knock warrant that killed Breonna Taylor, knowing very well that they did not provide any particular details to necessitate a warrant on her home. It was wrongly reported, I think, in the beginning that they got the wrong house. No, they did have a warrant for her house. But because the legal system encourages lazy policing, they didn't do any further investigating at all. They just thought, well, this guy got a package here once a few months ago, I guess he's here. And because our legal system is built the way it is and the judges are the way they are, the cops didn't even look into it.
Well, and of course, the mayor will tell you, oh, it might have been a no-knock warrant, but they did knock. And they very well may have, but when you're in plain clothes in the middle of the night, waking people up from their beds and you're armed, what else are people going to think, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, Jake used the term public health, and you have to ask, how do we measure success? How do we know we're doing the right thing? How do we know we're doing what the people want? And you can look at all of it in terms of public health and safety. And so we need to, what are we in this for? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? Most of the systems we have in place, whether it's the military or the food system or the transportation system or the energy system, most of the systems we have in place are not supposed to be by and for the people. They're supposed to be by and for concentrating capital. And we need to I always say we need to get to actual real democracy. We have a sham democracy. We have a fake democracy. Nobody's asking us whether we want the Omni Hotel or the Yum Center. Nobody's asking us what kind of transportation system or food system we want. And so it needs to be by and for the people, and we need to have a measure of success. And public health is as good as any. Peter, I get that from Peter Joseph, among other things. So
I'm glad you mentioned the Omni, Hart. I'm against looting as the next guy, but when I heard that the Omni's joke of a grocery store got hit, I almost had to smile because
I did smile
because it kind of deserves it, right? Like the citizens of Louisville paid for half of this ridiculous hotel, and the one little community benefit, besides, the jobs we were going to get and all that, the tourist dollars, was that finally we're going to get a downtown grocery store. And what they installed is such a slap in the face to the people who live here. To call that a grocery store, I mean, I'm ready to throw a brick through that window, right?
You want an $8 orange juice? I mean, who doesn't want an $8 orange juice?
And some bourbon to pour into it. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I would drink that, but
Right.
No, and I don't know. I don't watch every minute of local news coverage, but you're right. I saw them interviewing the owner of the Manhattan Grill. I did not see them talking about the rage against the Omni. Right?
Curious. Very curious.
Well, what else in our last 10 minutes do we see as a way forward? Not just defund the police, but defund the prisons too, right? Like, we're throwing all this money into keeping people in cages. And what do we get out of that? But a bunch of folks who feel like this society is not for them, and they might as well throw a brick through a window, right? Because might as well rob the next guy, because clearly they've been left behind, and all we want to do is put them in cages, whether it's people of color, poor people, or people coming across the border in desperate circumstances, children, for crying out loud. So let's defund the cages.
Yeah. I mean, you couldn't have said it better. And it's, it's very frustrating. I have like a blood feud with Vox. That's my take, not one of the radio station, not one of anybody else. It's fine. But personally, I do, because I saw on Twitter when people were talking about abolition of the police or abolition of prisons, a Vox writer got on and said, this is childish. This is not real policy. And I'm just like, this is the same nonsense from the data heads who hear of a movement that is very old and very vibrant. I remember in sociology class years ago, my professor was teaching us about prison abolition because it's been a thing since the 70s. People have been talking about this since my parents were younger than I am now, so it is a real thing to talk about. And it is a really important thing to ask the question, what use are we getting out of this, really? And the functions that are essential, like, I don't want like a serial rapist on the street necessarily, but are we,
Unless you're the serial rapist.
Well, I assure you I am not.
That was a bad joke. I'm sorry. I apologize to all of our listeners.
No,
I mean, the serial rapist needs
We
help
need a woke button, just like they have on Useful Idiots. I need to get woke.
I think Jake's point is that people need help, right?
Yeah.
That there is a mental health crisis in our nation, partly fueled by the mass incarceration and mass inequality in America. But we need to figure out how to heal people and from all kinds of trauma. And that has to be part of the process of justice in America, instead of just thinking we can correct people with the Department of Corrections. I mean, what a joke term is that? What are we correcting anymore?
It's like the answers are there. But politics is a spectator sport. We're supposed to pick a team and cheer for the team. We're not supposed to have any actual control over things. I have a great deal more faith in a real Democratic majority than any minority. And right now, in my view, we're ruled by a small minority. And the things that we want, some people, the average citizen doesn't know about prison abolition, but if it were explained to them for 5 minutes, they'd probably be in favor of it. But that doesn't make it through the filters in commercial media. You have, the manufacturing consent model. If a prison industrial complex is funding the media, then there's certain things they're not going to let get through. So we need to be informed and everything. And sometimes I feel bad about that I don't do this and I don't do that. But I have a passion for education and for spreading around good ideas, because it's like, if people only knew what's possible and what's available, then it would be different. They'd vote different, and they would believe a whole lot less of what they see on TV.
Jake, we're getting near the end of our time, but I know you got something else you want to share, so shoot.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short, but I was in jail with a man. He's a 50-year-old black man who grew up in Breckenridge County on a tobacco farm that his family owned, and I could only imagine. He only told me bits and pieces, but I can only imagine what he experienced being a 50-year-old black man in Breckinridge County. But he wanted to impart upon the white men that he was locked up with. I think his words were, "This isn't really your story to tell." And some people bristled at that because they were like, "Well, I'm in jail just like you right now," or like, "Hey, I got black family members, black siblings, maybe black significant other." But they missed the point when they took that the wrong way, because what he was trying to say is that this is much bigger than you. This is much bigger than this moment. That this is a life that he has had to live for 50 years, being shot at, had dogs on him, and all kinds of crosses burned in his yard, and all this just horrific stuff that truly changes your life. And what he was trying to say was that we have our own personal stories to tell. We have our own experiences that we can share as we will, but it's important to recenter it back on just the story, capital T, capital S, the story, right? And that's what I hope that I have been able to do, and I implore everybody listening to remember that, especially if you're white, because I'm on the left, and I believe in a collective struggle. I believe in solidarity, and I believe that it's a human obligation to fight something like racism. It's not just the obligation of people experiencing it, but it is true that my story is just my story. And I hope that people at home will recognize that they are sacrificing their bits of comfort for something much bigger than themselves. And there's nothing more beautiful and empowering than that feeling that I am putting myself on the line for something so much bigger, so much older, and something so much more beautiful than I could ever be alone. And so I ask you, if you can, go out there. Don't make it about you when you post on social media. Please do it because people need to see it. But it ain't about you. It ain't about me. It's about the us, the collective us, and becoming something better than what we are, because nothing is set in stone.
Well, that's extremely well put. Thank you very much, Jake.
Can I quote you on that and not give you credit?
You always ask me that, and I always say absolutely. I don't believe in intellectual property. I'm a socialist. What are you talking about?
Me either. Preach, brother.
I mean, what we can't do, though, as white people, is sit back and say, well, this is the black people's problem, right? So it's not about us, but we are the problem, right? So we need to address what's going on with white society, and white silence is violence. So it's important for us to tell a story to other white people, for sure. But you're right, Jake.
I want to sit back and clutch my pearls and focus on the property damage. All these looters are just going to ruin my life as I know it.
They're coming for the Dollar General down the street. Antifa is being bussed into your small town as you speak.
I'm glad we could end with a laugh.
Somehow.
Yeah, somehow. Well, that's all the time we have for today here on Truth to Power. This has been me, Justin Mogg. I want to thank Hart Hagan for being here every week with us. Anything coming up this week you want to promote on Let's Talk or Climate Report?
Just tune in at 7 o'clock. I've always got something at least a little bit odd to talk about.
All right. And Jake Bush, thank you for taking the time and joining us in the virtual studio. Anything coming up with DSA Louisville you want to promote?
Yeah. If you haven't ordered your absentee ballots, do it. If you are in District 4, you can vote for Robert Bell. He is a phenomenal candidate, but fully backed by DSA. And then in District 10, Ryan Fenwick is running for city council as well. I believe very strongly in both of those men, and I'd love to see them on city council. So fantastic.
And we'll take you back out to the streets with a few more seconds of protest.
It's our problem. It's everybody's problem. It's everybody's problem. Stand up. Stand up now. Speak up. If you're not protecting your friends, you ain't their friend. If you stay silent, you are the problem. Stand up for us. Your sons don't need a housework. Your sons ain't being shot in the street. Ours is. We being unlawfully arrested. We being taken advantage of. We are sick of it. Sick of it. No more silence. No. You get no peace from me. None of it. Stand up with us.
Thank you, guys. That was great.
Yeah. That kicked ass. I think that was pretty good.
Really appreciate it.
All right. Well, I've got a Philly cheesesteak calling my name downstairs.